Okay. My primary field is 19th century American literature and culture, and most of my work has focused on broadly issues of minority identity and issues of social justice. And that participates in a long tradition of trying to make legible lesser acknowledged populations and traditions. I'm keenly aware, however, that legibility and visibility themselves are really tricky dynamics. On the one hand, it allows a recognition of individuals and cultures that might otherwise be ignored or marginalized. On the other, it can shade into a kind of compulsive scrutiny of the other, where curiosity can sort of shade into an almost fetishistic interest. And my most recent work, a book I'm writing, takes that dynamic itself as an object of cultural analysis. What might it mean, in other words, for a culture to scrutinize a minority population? And my interest in this dynamic is particularly calibrated through issues of non-normative sexuality, spurred on by two comparatively recent events that I've worked on a lot with my colleague Tishna Asim. The first is the passage of Proposition 8 in California. The second was the subsequent momentum around same-sex marriage that has generated a huge amount of cultural interest, both positive and negative, in queerness itself as a thing. As a result, sexually non-normative bodies and cultures, in my opinion, face enormous pressure in contemporary society. They're frequently called upon to explain, to define, to defend, and to justify themselves. And I'm interested in how the realities of queer life are structured by that anatomization. I'm struck by the fact that it's even permissible for a culture to have an opinion on queerness, and that it's not even a question that queer civil rights or queer lives can be discussed every night on the evening news. To me, these dynamics emphasize how difference itself never exists in isolation from the culture in which it resides. Instead, it's intimately tied to that culture that wants to know it, and I put "know" in scare quotes here. Thus, part of the story of queerness, in my opinion, is the culture that anatomizes difference in the first place. And I'm writing a book, as I say, that examines that dynamic. It is centered on the 19th century, for reasons that we can talk about over lunch if you like, at a moment when non-normative bodies supposedly or presumably come into being as a result of a whole range of sexological discourse, scientific, pseudoscientific discourse. And it's centered on literature because literature and narrative offers alternative archives of difference that are routed through tone and theme and style. So at its core, my book is a contemporary cultural critique that has its roots in the 19th century. I just realized I put on my stopwatch instead of my timer. Thanks, June. My analysis of reactions to queerness is divided among four very broad topics with an accompanying text for each one. One topic is scrutiny, the next is ambivalence, the third is disregard, and the fourth is uncertainty. And again, we can talk about the text that I'm using to tease out the implications of these topics afterwards. I also have a concluding chapter on the issue of what I'm calling queer convenience, which is the ways in which certain works and authors are sometimes seen as queer or sometimes they are not seen as queer, depending on the needs of culture itself at any given time. The project thus situates reactions to difference as a subject for queer critique. And what I'm trying to do is offer an alternative queer analysis in which pressure is not placed on queerness itself as a body of analysis. Instead, I'm switching the scrutiny to the culture that wants to look at queerness. And in doing so, thanks, June, I'm trying to provide an alternative trajectory through which to consider the place of non-normative sexuality in culture that is not routinely discussed or even acknowledged in culture at this time. Am I good? Thanks.
Yes.